Hey guys, in this video we'll address how exactly you should approach the reading section, what strategies to use, and how to really ensure that you answer all 52 questions within the 65-minute time period allocated to you by the College Board. A quick disclaimer before we start, I never personally used any SAT prep books for the reading section and still managed to increase my score from around 280 out of 400 in the reading section to a perfect 400 through sheer practice. With that being said, let's get straight into it. First of all, you need to realize that the SAT is a standardized test. I know you're sitting there thinking, well, yeah, obviously, but if you really think about it, this means that each question the SAT asks of you has probably been planned, crafted, and typed up for hours on end to ensure that there is only one right answer and there is no room for subjectiveness. What this means is that each question in the reading section should have a few lines in the passage that unequivocally support it, and you cannot doubt this for a second. If you ever sit there and think, I crossed out two answer choices, but the remaining two seem equally correct, you're either missing something in the passage or misinterpreting the wording of each answer choice. Okay, let's start by discussing how exactly you should read a SAT passage. Ideally, you should spend around 3-4 minutes reading the passage and around 7 minutes after that answering questions. This is obviously subject to preference, but as a general rule of thumb, do not go over 13 minutes for any passage you're doing. Now, go to the practice test 10 on College Board's website and read the first literature passage and try to answer the questions yourself. Make sure you underline the key information such as a blurb or some text they give you, and cross out answers that you know are 100% wrong from the get-go. Lastly, listen to your gut and mark the questions you struggle at most, and then after all this, come back to this video and we'll discuss each question individually. Alright, let's begin answering the questions together. The first question asks us, the narrator of the passage can be best described as what? Okay, straight off the bat, we can always cross out one or two questions, or one or two answers rather. So let's look at the answer choices. One of Miss Spivey's former students, Miss Spivey's predecessor, and Miss Spivey herself. We definitely know that Miss Spivey herself is wrong and Miss Spivey's predecessor is wrong. Why is that? Because it mentions Miss Spivey's predecessor, but it never once explicitly says that the person speaking is Miss Spivey's predecessor, and the student or the perspective of the narrator seems to be a student rather than teacher herself. Alright? So we can cross this. Now, we look back at the text and we look for some lines that tell us the answer is correct. Okay? Or one of the answers here, or one of the choices here is correct. So looking at the text, we can go somewhere random. Let's look at this paragraph here. Alright? We notice that straight away it was there. She told us, in the midst of trying to find her true mission in life, that she wandered one afternoon into a lecture by the famous John Dewey. Alright, she told us, and this is when she was addressing the classroom, which means that the narrator has to be one of her old students, right? So we know that A is definitely the right answer, but we still check C to make sure that we haven't missed anything. C says, an anonymous member of the community. While the student is obviously a member of the community, this word anonymous here makes me go, where does it mention in the passage the word anonymous, and why would the person be anonymous? And I can't answer either question because the passage doesn't provide me with enough information, so I can cross that out and move on to the next question. Okay, in the passage, 3-step is mainly presented as what? A summer retreat for vacationers, a small rural town, or a town that is home to a prominent university, or a comfortable suburb. We definitely know that this is wrong, question C, because while it does mention university, that's talking about Columbia University, and that's in a completely different town in New York City, or in a state rather. A summer retreat for vacationers. Summer retreat makes you think of, the weather, beaches and stuff. And while it does mention hot weather here, it doesn't say it in a positive light, so we can cross this out as well. A small rural town. Now this seems to be the option here, so I'll put a mark next to it. And why do I think that? Well, just look at the text. Here it says, hard times are upon us, but like my mama said, we were no poorer than we'd ever been. So it obviously tells us that these people aren't too well off. So I'm trying to look for other evidence in the text of this information. Obviously this is good enough, but I guess there might be more supporting information. And I cannot really spot anything right off the bat, but let's go down and check the other question, the other answer choice. A comfortable suburb. All right, so that's obviously wrong because these people are quite poor, and hard times are still upon us. So we'll mark B and move on. Alright, so let's move on to question 3 and 4. The reason I say 3 and 4 is because question 4 gives us line options that help us answer question 3. And let's begin by reading question 3. Okay, it can reasonably be inferred from the passage. Notice how the word inferred here is used by the test makers to make you think that you have to think of some connotations or something like that. But remember that the evidence for each answer choice will always be in the text, so do not make the mistake of thinking of some implicit meaning of some words or some secondary definitions, because that is not what you have to do. Alright? Let's keep reading. It can reasonably be inferred from the passage that some of the people at the train station regard Miss Spivey's comment about the Georgia heat with what? Sympathy, because they assume that she's experiencing intense heat for the first time. Disappointment, because they doubt that she will stay in 3-step for very long. Embarrassment, because they imagine that she's superior to them. And resentment, because they feel that she's minimizing their discomfort. Okay. Now let's look at the answer choices and read each one, and notice that some words in each of these answer choices might help us identify which one of these answers are definitely wrong and which are somewhat right. Okay, so first of all, lines 2 to 5, she stepped angle. Let's go back to lines 2 to 5, and we can start here. She stepped out the train station wearing a pair of thick-soled boots suitable for hiking, a navy blue dress, and a little white tam that rode the waves of her red hair at a gravity-defying angle. So that says nothing about the heat, so we can cross that off straight off the bat. So we can go here and remove this answer choice. 10 to 14, I believe else. So let's go to line 10. I believe her remark irritated some of the people gathered to welcome her on the burned grass alongside the tracks. When folks are sweating through their shorts, they don't like to hear that this is nothing compared to someplace else. Okay, so that's pretty useful. So I'm going to mark that. And let's think about what this tells us and how we can answer question 3 from it. Alright? So we know that her remark irritated some of the people gathered there. And it also tells us that when folks are sweating through their shorts, they don't like to hear that this is nothing compared to someplace else. Notice the emphasis on nothing. So we can go back and we can immediately cross out some answer choices, right? So embarrassment, that is definitely not what these people are feeling, the local people are feeling. Sympathy, also no. Disappointment, see, this might be possible if you just look at the word disappointment, but at the same time, is disappointment really supported? Not really, from the text or the answer choice that we just picked, because where does it say that these people were disappointed? It uses harsh words like irritated, and it says that when folks are sweating through their shorts, they don't like to hear that this is nothing. Again, the emphasis on nothing. So I wouldn't say that they're disappointed, and I would go straight with resentment, but just to make sure that this answer choice is right and the other lines support this, I would also go back and look at line 14 to 20 and 23 to 25 and make sure that my answer is right. Although we don't have to do that for this because the answer is quite clear cut, and these lines 14 to 20 and 23 to 25 don't really offer us any more extra additional information. Alright, let's take a look at question 5 now. Miss Spivey most likely uses the phrase fruitful intermission to indicate what? She benefited from taking time off her studies in order to travel. Her travels with Janet Miller encouraged her to start medical school. Her early years at boarding school resulted in unanticipated rewards. What she thought would be a short break from school lasted several years. Okay. First of all, let's just go back to line 26 and read what it says. And we can start a little bit higher, so we can start from the top of the sentence to really understand the context. She'd gone to boarding schools since she was 6 years old. She studied French in Paris and drama in London, and during what she called a fruitful intermission in her formal education, she traveled extensively in the Near East and Africa with a friend of her grandmother's, one Janet Miller, who was a medical doctor from Nashville, Tennessee. Okay. So, notice how the SAT is trying to trick you. The College Board is trying to trick you. It says here with option B that her travels with Janet Miller encouraged her to start medical school. It never mentioned that at all. And what it did was mention that Janet Miller actually went to medical school and was a doctor. So we can cross that off because that's not what the line is trying to tell us. Okay? Next. She benefited from taking time off her studies in order to travel. I think this is probably the right answer, but we'll consider the rest as well. Because fruitful intermission, but the word fruitful indicates that something good happened, that she learned something or she experienced something good. And here it says studies in order to travel. If we go back to the answer choice, here it says she had traveled extensively. So we do know that she traveled, and we do know that she took a break from her formal education. Alright? Next, her early years at boarding school resulted in unanticipated rewards. These words, unanticipated rewards, aren't really supported by the text at all, because where over here or here does it give us any indication of some unanticipated rewards? While her meeting with Janet Miller was unanticipated, it's not really in reference to the early school years she had at boarding school, right? So I would cross that off. Moving on then, what she thought would be a short break from school lasted several years. Again, while this might be true, it never explicitly mentions this, and it's not an idea that's kind of exemplified by this phrase fruitful intermission, so we can cross that out and move on and choose A as our right answer. Alright, moving on to question 6. The interaction between Miss Spivey and Ralph Lord serves mainly to what? So let's first identify where they really interact. So, here, okay. So, when my little brother Ralph Ford asked what did she study at Barnard College, Miss Spivey explained that Barnard, which obviously, okay, first of all, notice that Barnard is the correct spelling and Barnyard was obviously the wrong spelling, which she wrote on the blackboard, was a sister school of Columbia University, of which she expected we had all heard. Okay, let's go back to the question and read the answer choices. Suggests that Miss Spivey has an exaggerated view of what information should be considered common knowledge. I really like that, so I'll put a mark next to it. Establish a friendly dynamic between the charming school children and their indulgent and doting new instructor. Um, See, the thing is, we don't even need to go up and read that again or think about what we just read because for answer choices such as this, notice the use of words that are overly positive or overly negative, right? So the word friendly dynamic between the charming school teacher and their indulgent and daunting new instructor. The use of these like almost I guess extreme words really highlights this answer choice as being, not really objective, and I wouldn't really pick this, and this would kind of be like my last resort. And after reading that text, we don't even need to consider this as an answer choice because we obviously know it's wrong. Um, Next, introduce Ralph Lauren as a precocious young student and Miss Spivey as a dismissive and disinterested teacher. Right, so you might not know what the word precocious means, but you don't even need to know that to answer this question because the second part of the answer choice says Miss Spivey as a dismissive and disinterested teacher. Okay, let's go back to the answer or where the text is, and here it says, when my little brother Ralph Lord asked what did she do at college, or what did she study at Barnard College, Miss Spivey explained that Barnard, which she wrote on the blackboard, was a sister school of Columbia University. Right. Where in this part is Miss Spivey at all disinterested or dismissive, right? She's a bit, like I guess you get the implicit sense that she's a bit like, these kids should know this, and she wrote it on the blackboard, and this Barnard text is, underlined, which tells you that Miss Spivey expects that, these school children should obviously know what Barnard College is. But it's not like she's dismissive, and she addresses her question or Ralph Lauren's question, and she just moves on, right? So I would cross this answer choice off because of these words again. And notice how they're also extremes, dismissive and disinterested. And this kind of points towards the fact that these might obviously be wrong. Okay? Now let's consider answer choice D. Demonstrate that the children want to amuse Miss Spivey with their questions. While that might be true for other interactions, like the one here with what's her name, Mavis Davis, that's not necessarily true with Ralph Lord because Ralph Lord's question, if you notice, seemed a bit what's the word, like genuine, right? So when my little brother Ralph Ford asked what did she study, because he didn't ask her some comedic question or some question to incite some humor, right? He simply asked her what she studied at college, which is like a common question, I guess. And notice how even here, Miss Spivey paused her for questions, avoiding my brother Ralph Ford's eye. Even this interaction serves to tell us that Ralph Ford isn't really trying to incite humor, but he's genuinely just trying to ask questions, and obviously she's avoiding having him ask questions because, I guess the questions is considered kind of stupid, but it doesn't mean that the children or Ralph Ford in general are trying to amuse Miss Spivey with their questions, so I would cross that off as well and pick option A. Moving straight on, let's consider question 7. In the third paragraph, what is the narrator most likely suggesting by describing Miss Spivey as having wandered in one situation and marched in another situation? So let's go back to the third paragraph around line 40. So that's here, right? This part here. And let me just erase this so it's easier for us to... Oh, oops, that's a highlighter. Let me just erase this so it's easier for us to read. It was there, she told us, in the midst of trying to find her true mission in life, that she wandered one afternoon to a lecture by famous John Dewey, who was talking about his famous book, Democracy and Education. Professor Dewey was in his 70s by then, Miss Spivey said, but he still liked to chat with students after lecture, especially female students, she added. Sometimes over coffee, and seeing their eyes afire, his words could kindle. It was after this lecture and subsequent coffee that Miss Spivey had marched to the teacher's college, again marched, and signed up Olive Flame. I guess this is enough context for these words, but you can keep reading on this part here. But let's go back to the answer choices. So, again, by the way, notice how this says most likely suggesting. Again, this kind of incites you. The test makers are trying to tell you to assume something or think about some connotations. But remember, we have to think about explicit meanings that those lines have told us, or those words in this case have told us. So Dewey, knowing Miss Spivey wasn't very confident in her ability to teach, instilled in her a sense of determination. This isn't necessarily true because if we go back, her first interaction with him gave her, I guess, the inspiration to go and become a teacher. She never pursued teaching before that, so we know that this option is definitely wrong. Talking with Dewey over coffee made Miss Spivey realize how excited she was to teach in the poorest, most remote corner of America. If we go back to this answer choice, see that while that might originally sound true, so let's read this again. It was there she told us in the midst of trying to find her true mission in life that she wandered one afternoon to a lecture by the famous Jordan Dewey. He was talking about his famous book, this. Um, hmm. So after that conversation, she did march to the teachers' college, right? And she did want to bring democracy and education to the poorest, darkest, most remote and foreign corner of America. So let's go back to this, and I guess I'll make a mark next to this because I'm not entirely convinced that that's the right answer, right? Because it's not like talking with Dewey over coffee made Miss Spivey realize how excited she was to teach in this particular place. But I guess that conversation ignited her passion to teach, and that obviously led to this idea of teaching in the most remote corner of America. Okay, so after 2 years spent studying, Miss Spivey was anxious to start teaching and be in charge of her own classroom. Definitely not true, and that's not what these words "wandered" and "march" are really trying to communicate either. Next option, Miss Spivey's initial encounter with Dewey's ideas was somewhat accidental, but ultimately motivated her to decisive action. One thing that you should notice with the SAT and the answer choices are this, alright? I would note this down if I was you. Number one, vague equals better. Now, I can't really explain to you why this is a trend, but generally, the more vague answer tends to be more right on the SAT, right? So, if we look at these ideas here, Miss Spivey's initial encounter with Dewey's idea was somewhat accidental, right? This links in with the word wandered because when you're wandering, you're not really, being decisive in your actions. You're just going someplace random, right? So that fits in with the word wandered, but ultimately motivated her to decisive action. That fits in with the word march because she's marching with, command, and she kind of knows what she's doing. She wants to be a teacher. She wants to bring change in the poorest areas of America and bring democracy to those areas. So I really like this, and while it's pretty vague, and this isn't kind of answer choice you would pick in a regular school test. This is kind of fit for the SAT. So I would mark this as a right answer, and move on to the next question. All right. So question 8. According to the passage, Miss Spivey ended up in 3-step as a direct result of what? Her friendship with Janet Miller, attending college in New York City. Attending college in New York City, talking with a woman at the WPA, Miss Chandler's retirement for teaching. Okay. Look at these keywords. Direct result of. What is a direct result? A direct result means that an action happens, right? And as a result of that action, another thing happens, right? So another action occurs. So if we go back to that part of the text, right, and we look here, where was that part? Well, they're meeting with John Dewey. How have I forgotten this already? Right, here. 2 years later, she told a cheery blue-suited woman from the WPA that she wanted to bring democracy and education to the poorest, darkest, most remote and forgotten corner of America. They sent her to 3-step Georgia. Notice how she tells this woman at the WPA that she wants to teach in the darkest area of America, and she straight away goes to 3-step Georgia. So obviously, talking to that woman at the WPA was led directly to her teaching at 3-step Georgia, so we will mark that as a right answer. So now we're probably feeling pretty confident, and these last 2 questions tend to be the hardest, so I guess we got to put more thought into them. In the passage, when Miss Spivey announces that she had seen camels, the students' reaction suggests that they are delighted, fascinated, baffled, worried. So, I would say that this is definitely a pretty hard question, so let's consider the answer choices and see which word probably fits the most, okay? So lines 82 to 84, she looked thought. Let's go to lines 82 and 84. She looked around the room, waiting for us to be amazed and delighted at the thought. Okay. This tells us, without even looking at the answer choices, this tells us that when she said this phrase, or when she told them about the camels, she expected that the students would be like wowed and be like, whoa, that's really crazy. But that's not really what happened, right? Because, like it says, she looked around the room, waiting, but no one really, did anything because they all just hung there for a minute. So let's go to the next answer choice. And I wouldn't say, let's look at these answer choices and think about some negative connotations, or not connotations rather, some negative meanings or secondary definitions that arise from what we just read. I wouldn't say that gives a sense of worriness, and it definitely doesn't give a sense of baffled or fascinated or delighted. So I guess we look at the other answer choices and hope that we can come to a more conclusive end. So lines 85 to 86, we all up. We all hung there for a minute, thinking hard until Miss Davis spoke up. Again, that doesn't necessarily, them thinking could signify that they're baffled. So I will put a line there and I will put a line here, but I'm not entirely convinced, and that seems like kind of like a last answer that I would pick. Lines 87 to 90. Where's that? Here. She means like 3 kings rode to Bettelheim, Mavis said, and she folded her hands smugly on her 7th grade desk in the back of the room. Okay. Notice how this is saying, or the answer is asking us the student's reaction. Okay? This line or this evidence here doesn't really tell us anything about the student's reaction, rather just tells us a phrase from Mavis where she's obviously trying to be humorous, but it doesn't tell us anything about the student's general reaction, so we can cross that out, and we can obviously cross the A part out. And then let's look at the final line evidence, lines 91 to 95, instead to right. Okay. Miss Spivey made the mistake right then. Instead of beaming upon Mavis the kind of congratulatory smile that old Miss Chanda would have bestowed on her for having enlightened the rest of us, Miss Spivey simply said, "That's right." Okay. Again, with this answer choice, does it really tell us anything about the students' reactions? No. It just gives us the narrator's opinion, or the mistake Miss Spivey made explaining that, giving a description of that, a brief analysis, but it doesn't really tell us what the student's reaction is. And if we go back to line B, lines 85 to 86, here, we all hung there for a minute thinking hard until Miss Mavis Davis spoke up. This phrase, thinking hard, tells me that they're probably baffled. Does it tell us that they're worried? No. Does it tell us that they're fascinated? Definitely not. Delighted? Definitely not. And even if we didn't pick this answer choice here, by just understanding what this text here is saying, we would definitely know that they weren't delighted because they were so confused. They weren't fascinated by the fact that she saw camels. So delighted would generally be wrong anyway. Fascinated, again, they weren't fascinated. That's why these students hung up and didn't say really anything and were thinking hard about the importance, I guess, of Miss Spivey telling them this information. So I would pick option B here and pick C, and then move on to the next paragraph, or the next passage rather. Okay, I hope that gives you a general idea of my thought process during the SAT reading passage. I will be uploading more videos regarding different types of passages in the reading section in the near future, so make sure to frequently visit StudySmart for any updates. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to press the contact page on studysmart.me to reach out to me for further help. Thank you guys.